So yeah, we are now going to introduce our workflow we've recently created to identify and address preservation issues during data preparation. So, sorry. So as we all know, preservation should be planned as early as possible. Ideally, we should not end up discovering that some files ingested to our digital repository are damaged and sometimes fully unreadable. But as we have seen in our last presentation, the National Archives are not in charge of appraising archives before submitting them for ingestion. Appraisal and SIP preparation are performed by mission archivists who may only have limited tools at their disposal to analyze files from a preservation perspective. And as we mentioned during, we've just mentioned, they're using RECIP to prepare these SIPs. And another limitation we are facing is that our VTAM-based digital archiving platform has limited possibilities for automated auditing at ingest. So it simply identifies file formats using its implementation of Siegfried, but it does not provide information regarding potential problems in data quality, and it doesn't confirm the formats it identifies for to our formats policy either. So a first constatation that we made when auditing the contents of our digital repository is that most objects were identified, but some of these identifications were incorrect, either due to limitations of the identification tools themselves, or because of the way Siegfried is implemented in VTAM, which, among other things, mean the way it's implemented is that in cases of multiple identifications, VTAM will choose the first identification in the list provided by Siegfried, which is not necessarily the right one. And a second constatation, sorry about that. A second constatation we made was that while most objects were readable, some files could not be accessed either due to damage or to protection features such as password protection or encryption. In the case of damaged files, we could sometimes quote unquote repair the file and ingest a second version, a repaired version of the file to the digital repository. But first of all, this is a fairly complex process. And second, in most cases, there was nothing we could do to deal with that problem. To give you some further context on the elaboration of this workflow, so as we've just mentioned, 2 years ago, the National Archives published their formats policy. It sorts a number of formats in the following categories: accepted, tolerated, rejected, or requiring further analysis by the Department of Data Administration. Rather than a set of hard requirements, it is meant to provide a guideline to mission archivists when evaluating digital archives. And we use these categories for the sake of convenience, but the idea is not to rate or rank the formats featured in our policy. The idea is more to indicate the degree to which the National Archives can guarantee the long-term preservation of a given format. And so, as we also mentioned, the policy is very open, and most formats are either accepted or tolerated. The only exceptions will be first formats that present obstacles for preservation. So for instance, zip files or password protected files, and formats corresponding to files that have no inherent archival value, such as system files, temporary files, or shortcuts. It doesn't make sense to collect and preserve these files, which is why they're excluded rather than for preservation reasons. There are also stricter criteria for database formats, as those represent a large proportion of what the National Archives collect. And given our position at the end of the archiving chain, and given the legal obligations of public archiving in France, this policy is meant to adapt to the reality of collecting rather than to constrain it. For the same reasons, our recommendations and the checks we might perform do not include validation, as archivists can neither control file creation tools nor potentially reject invalid files.
Having made that constellations and knowing our context, the workflow we are going to introduce is situated before SIP constitution. It aims to allow archivists faced with a production that is both massive and very diverse in terms of contents and in terms of file format to perform a minimal audit in order to ensure that the packages submitted to our digital repository for ingest meet a certain quality level. If validation isn't required, the files and data that are eventually ingested should meet the minimal condition of being identified first and of being readable and intelligible, and if possible, for any damage to their contents to be known and documented. That's why these goals must be taken into account before ingestion, and therefore as early as possible during the data preparation process. In an ideal scenario, it will be as soon as archives are received by the mission archivists, and an audit aiming at ensuring data quality should be performed at the very latest moment when the SIP is created in RECIP. So the idea for us was to create a data preparation workflow and a tool that automates part of the process to make it easier for archivists to perform that quality audit. So our tool is named André, AN standing for Archives Nationales, National Archives, Android for, the file format identification tool developed by the UK National Archives, as this tool works by analyzing a Droid report. It is aimed at data preparers, and as we've seen, the data preparers will be in most cases mission archivists, but also archivists in the National Archives in some specific cases for internally produced archives, for private archives, or for data migration. It is simple to use and relies on two well-known and widely used tools, Droid and Excel. So there are two main steps. The first one is to run Droid, obviously, on the file hierarchy that needs to be audited for potential preservation issues, and to export the results in a CSV file. The second step uses an Excel worksheet where a macro allows the user to import the CSV made by Droid and to obtain an audit report on its contents. Of course, this implementation of our workflow requires having both the macro-enabled worksheets and Droid on hand, which is not always possible for mission archivists, as they may not be able to receive emails with the macro-enabled attachments or to download them, or to install software on their workstation for security reasons. They might deal with their IT service to do so. The reason we are using Droid report for this audit is that we've noticed that format identification issues were often, not always, but often symptoms of preservation issues. An identified file or a file with multiple identifications in cases where we wouldn't expect that, or a file with an extension mismatch is often going to have some kind of readability issues, in particular if the bitstream is damaged, or to require some action on our part to ensure its preservation. But why they use format identification tools, Droid in the case of RECIP and Siegfried in the case of VITAM? RECIP and VITAM do not give all the information Droid and Siegfried usually provide, which means that these identification issues are quite obscured, along with the file quality problem they might reveal. That means that a Droid report will provide more accurate information, more complete information on file format identification, and along with other elements from this report, such as the names, the sizes, the hashes, the extensions, this information can be used as a first assessment of file quality, and at the same time, the format identification themselves can be compared to our format policy. As the analysis of Droid report can be very time-consuming as a number of files to identify grow, we created that macro-enabled Excel sheet to partly automate the audits. The end result is a report on the number of empty files and empty folders. Files we have previously described as having no archival value. We meant system files, temporary files, shortcuts. The number of compressed files, files with no extension or with an extension mismatch, unidentified files, file with multiple identification. As we've seen, those are potential symptoms of readability issues. The report also includes the number of files belonging to each categories outlined in the National Archives format policy, accepted, tolerated, require further analysis from our department, as well as the files in format missing from this policy. The macro also highlights duplicates on the basis of their hashes if the droid exports include that information.
And now we're going to give you a little demonstration of that tool. So let's meet. So here's how it works. So with the first shortcut, we select a droid report to import in the first tab of the worksheet. There we go. The second tab contains our formats policy, and as you can see, formats are identified by their PIDs, which means that they will be the formats featured in the droid reports will be it will be possible to compare them to this policy. Now, fingers crossed it works. With a second shortcut, we are actually performing our audits. If we go back to the first tab, you see that a new column has appeared with the status of each format, with the status of each file according to our formats policy. And in the third tab, the audit tab, we first get some general statistics. So we have the total number of files, total number of folders, total number of empty folders and of empty files. So these have been identified by their size, which will be given in the droid report as 0. So we have then the number of system files. This will be the sum of files with .ini, .sys, .dll extension, and files with a dsstore or sums.db name. We have the number of temporary files. So these are files with a $$ prefix or ._ prefix, the latter being because so ._ is ._ prefix is what we will see in the case of an Apple global resource fork, and these will usually be treated the same way as temporary files would be. We have shortcut files identified by their PUID. We have also, as we mentioned, duplicates will be highlighted in the first tab. We have the number of compressed files. Those are files that have been identified as zip, gzip, bzip, 7-zip, or RAR. Next, we have a category for extension-related issues with the number of files without an extension and the number of files for which Droid has flagged an extension mismatch. And then a category for identification-related information. So the number of files with a single identification, which is what we usually expect. The number of files with multiple identification, which, as we've mentioned, can sometimes reveal preservation issues, and the number of unidentified files. And last, for files that do have an identification, and in the case of files with multiple IDs on the basis of the first one only, we have the number of files that are accepted in our formats policy, the number of tolerated files, the number of files in rejected formats, the number of files in formats requiring further analysis from our department, and the number of files that are in formats missing from our policy. So based on the information in this report, archivists will be able to perform further verifications for example, by trying to open files that might have issues. And the information regarding formats policy compliance also allows archivists to take into account early in the data preparation process the degree to which the National Archives can guarantee the preservation of the files they are processing, as well as the presence of files with no archival value. Those might then be eliminated. So, for instance, shortcut files or temporary files will be eliminated at this stage. And in other cases, for instance, rejected database formats, this information should lead data preparers to convert or extract data in a different format. In the case of files in formats requiring further analysis from our department, data preparer will have to contact us, and whether we accept these files or not will depend on their content, as we need to see if the format is actually suited to the content. To give you an example, we don't consider HTML to be a suitable format for email preservation, and therefore we will advise against archiving emails in that format. And formats missing from our policy should also prompt data preparers to reach out to us so that we can investigate these formats. And depending on what we find out, we will then advise them on how to proceed, and we might, if needed, update our policy to include these new formats. Yeah. So
go back to the slides.
Yeah. Okay.
Let's continue. So this tool was conceived as a part of a wider reflection on data preparation best practices, which also entailed gathering the issues that data preparers might encounter, ways to detect them, and potential fixes in what we've called the Little Data Preparer's Handbook as a general reminder. The handbooks also outlines the consequences each issue may have if left unaddressed. While the André tool we've shown you provides you a way to detect these issues in a single audit, data preparers who are unable to use the macro-enable worksheets or to run Droid can perform similar checks manually or with alternative auditing tools, which the handbook describes. It also indicates solutions for each problem that audits might reveal. These solutions can be implemented running various tools such as the search bar of Windows Explorer, Recip, or even PowerShell commands. And it can be implemented at various stages before or while the files are processed in Recip. For example, file liking an extension, if there are no other problem, might be given the right one for the format, either manually or using a PowerShell script or a dedicated program. Another example would be setting Recip to exclude temporary files on import using the option André has shown you while presenting our email archiving workflow.
So as we have seen, this workflow is suited to the specific context of the French Public Archives Network, which is organized in such a way that while the National Archives can make recommendations, they are in most cases not directly involved in the appraisal and preparation of data. So, and we also can't assume that these tasks will be performed by specialist practitioners, as their knowledge of preservation issues and also their technical means to address them will vary a lot. It's also tailored to our formats policy, which itself was conceived to fit the legal framework of the obligation we have in public archives collecting in France. But despite these specificities, we are convinced that elements of this workflow could be adapted to be useful in different contexts, especially since Droid is very widely used internationally. And to go back to our context, in the past few months, some archive missions, have started using this workflow after they expressed interest in testing it, and we've received very positive feedback so far. But it's still a work in progress. We only started formalizing this workflow during last summer, and our reflection and experiments are ongoing.
We have also been developing a tool meant to go beyond what a Droid report might reveal to detect preservation issues. This tool is called Sophocle, and it's a Python executable which simulates the opening of files of certain formats to check their readability and accessibility. In order to perform these checks in cases where the number of files with potentially problematic issues, it's such that it would be impossible for the archivist to do so manually. At this point, Sophocle is for internal use only, but it has already proven useful in some real use cases, but it has its limitations. It is only able to attempt to open certain formats and chooses a program to do so on the basis on the extensions only. Also, the report flag issues using categories which might have different meaning depending on the content types. We mean by that a file being corrupted won't have the same implication for an image file as it would for a PDF, for example. We are still working on the output of this tool because it makes us face theoretical questions. We don't have firm answers for regarding the definition of these issue categories of corrupted files. Well, thank you for your attention. Well, again, if you have any questions, we'll do our best to answer them. And we are looking forward to any comments you might have on this workflow.
Wow. Thanks again, guys. That was excellent. I'm conscious that I asked you too many questions about your first presentation. We're a little bit tight for time, so I'm going to just allow 1 or 2 questions for this one. And I'm sorry, I hope we can follow up with debates and give you some feedback afterwards as well.
Yeah,
but I guess, yeah. So Dave asks one of the questions in the chat that I was going to ask, which is your little data preparer's handbook publicly available?
So this one has a short answer. No, it isn't. So far, it's still a work in progress, first of all, and so far we've shared it on a request basis, more or less, with archive missions, and we've also presented it internally to some volunteers from the National Formats Watch Unit, which is our
Yes, and well, if we have to make it available, it's in French, so we have to translate it first.
Okay.
But it would be interesting.
Yeah, no, I think there's lots of it. And about the Android setup, is that available as well? Is that in GitHub, or are you sharing it, or?
In a general way, we are really thinking on how to make this tool public, because we don't have a GitHub site. So for now, we just share the macro with the people who are interested in it. But
we're trying to figure out a way to share this kind of tool more widely, because it's something we'd be interested in doing.
Yes, I don't know if maybe with Copter we can do something. Maybe it would be interesting. We don't know yet. We are really thinking about that.
Okay.
Well, if you're interested, just
yeah, if you're interested, you have our emails.
That's brilliant. Thank you. Thank you. And I can see, of course, now questions are flooding in on the chat. So thank you again. I'm going to ask everyone to give you a virtual round